to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrador. This is episode 111, and this is our best of 2017 episode. We are so excited to wrap up our year with clips from the episodes that you all loved and shared the most. We have compiled highlights as a gift for you. Before we get into the amazing content, we have to acknowledge the Weston A. Price Foundation. They are a spectacular member-supported nonprofit that is all about embracing traditional wisdom for good health today. This show wouldn't be happening without the foundation, so if you can, please consider a year-end donation of any size to keep this Wise Traditions podcast going strong through 2018. And thank you. Hey, and speaking of Wise Traditions, the foundation hosts a conference by that same name every year. And in 2018, it's going to be in Baltimore, Maryland, November 16th to the 18th. This is going to be the conference to end all conferences. They are currently lining up top-notch speakers, amazing exhibitors, and pre- and post-conference events. I couldn't be more excited, and so I want to see you there. Mark that date on your calendar now and start booking your flights even. You couldn't make a better investment for your health. And now we're going to get right into the best of episode. First up is Lindsea Willon from episode number 88, Get Off the Sugar Roller Coaster. Lindsea studied nutritional sciences at the University of California, Berkeley. She has her master's in kinesiology in addition to her certification as a nutritional therapy practitioner. Lindsea understands, obviously, the importance of a nutritionally complete diet. And so today she gives us insights into how our bodies should be fueled to stay strong and avoid that sugar roller coaster that we so often end up on. We recorded this episode live in California right before we recorded a live show at the Topanga table. So check it out and enjoy. I see a lot of people thinking, I just need to up my fruits and vegetables, and that's what my body needs best. That's how my body's going to function best. What do you think of that, Lindsay?
It's such a good question, right? Because I feel like in our history, in our political food history, so many food groups have been villainized, but fruits and vegetables have been spared. So they are widely considered fresh and vibrant and full of antioxidants and really the best food for you, right? Everyone can agree that fruits and vegetables are part of a healthy diet, no matter what side of the political nutrition spectrum you come from.
True.
But the problem is when we start overeating fruits without regard for the fact that in the body, it's just sugar. When we are overeating fruits, when we're overeating our starchy vegetables, it's our body, we don't have a separate biochemical energy pathway for fruit, right? It doesn't go down a different chute. Our body breaks it completely down into glucose, right? So when you fill up your plate with yams and potatoes and beets and carrots and apricots and bananas, to your body, that's just one big pile of sugar.
Wow, that's really eye-opening. I think one thing that threw us off was the food pyramid, because at the bottom were all these starchy grains and breads and pasta and whatnot, and then higher up they had fruit and vegetable in a separate category. So that might have added to our confusion, right?
Absolutely. They're completely separated in everyone's brain, right? I mean, they are and they should be considered separate food groups. But at the end of the day, how our body sees food is not in 9 different food groups. It's in, is this fat? Is this sugar? Is this a protein? And that's what it breaks down to at the end of the day. And of course, we want to have a very holistic view of food, right? I don't want to look at my plate and see macronutrients. I want to see where the food came from and what animal made it. But to our body, we need to be careful of overloading that plate with all just sugar.
Well, let's say we start our day with some bananas and berries, and we're just kind of going down this track. What is happening? Help me understand what is happening inside my body when all that sugar comes down the pike.
Meet insulin. So when you're eating all of that sugar, especially when it's unopposed, and what I mean by that is there's not a lot of fiber, protein, or especially fat to come with it. So think your fruit juices, even your, fresh fruit juices.
Oh my gosh, juicing is so popular here. We're in California right now, you guys. And everywhere I turn, there's another smoothie juice place.
And it's just the fruit sugar taken away from the fiber. So if you want to go enjoy, your Malibu fresh, pressed juice, make sure you've got some raw milk with you to kind of put in there, or a nice little dab of raw cream, because the fat will help slow the absorption of that sugar into your bloodstream. The reason that it's so important about the rate at which sugar hits the bloodstream is because that's what determines how much insulin, or if your body has to overproduce insulin in response to your sugar. So when you're starting your day with fruit, right, you're doing everything right. You're listening to everyone who's telling you how to eat, right? Nutritionist or non, right? Yes. Everyone's got an opinion. You're doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, or unfortunately at the beginning of your day, here's what begins the blood sugar roller coaster. Mm-hmm. Your blood sugar is going to increase very quickly. Your body's going to produce insulin to compensate. Then here comes our sugar crash. What is it now? 10 a.m. You're reaching for your coffee because you're tired, right? Or you're reaching for a muffin to get you back up, to get you going till lunch.
And that's the sugar roller coaster kind of.
That is the sugar roller coaster. It's basically your blood sugar increases. Most people are insulin resistant, so they have to overproduce insulin in order to get the proper effect of the blood sugar lowering, and then they decrease, right? So imagine you're in the desert, you're living in Arizona. Okay. Now your air conditioner is super sensitive. So all of a sudden the air inside the house, we get to 80, okay? Air conditioner kicks on, but instead of bringing it to a nice normal 70 degrees, it takes it down to like 50 degrees. Oh. So all of a sudden you went from being slightly uncomfortable and it's too hot in the house to let me grab my blanket because the air conditioner is too effective.
Got it.
So that's basically what's happening in the body, is that we have this overreactive pancreas that's overproducing insulin. We see, okay, we've got sugar coming in. If it's coming in quickly, then our body gets nervous. Oh, there might be a lot behind it, right? So even if it's just a banana, if it hits the blood sugar quickly, our body's going to overreact, right? You just went from 70 degrees to 80 degrees too quickly. The air conditioner kicked on too strong, right? The insulin you produced was too much for what you ate. And now you have low blood sugar.
Oh my gosh, I live with some people. I don't want to out my family, but I live with some people who are on this roller coaster you're describing. They will grab a banana for breakfast, and then a couple hours later, they'll be hangry. That's how they call it. And I will say, well, it doesn't matter what I say, but I understand that something else had to have come with that banana, because if they just have that banana, it's going to cause something bad. I don't understand all the science behind it like you do, but I could see in their lives what's playing out isn't good.
Absolutely. It's so common. And it plays out in the entire day, right? You grab your sugar for breakfast, right? No matter what it looks like. You get some kind of sugar in the mid-morning. By lunch, you're craving carbohydrates. You have what turns into sugar for lunch. I don't even understand how people stay awake through 2 to 4 p.m. if they're on this sugar roller coaster, because that's when it hits the hardest. And that's when you see everyone in line at a coffee shop trying to get them through the rest of the workday, because it hits them so hard. And then they expect to sleep through the night and have energy, and it's a terrible vicious cycle.
And you said insulin resistance a moment ago. And when I think of insulin, I think of diabetics. And can you help us all get a better handle on what that means to be insulin resistant?
The way I like to describe it is in an analogy to anything else that you become accustomed to. So my favorite way to think about it is like a car alarm, right? You hear a car alarm, it's really annoying, right? Immediately you're going to get up, you're going to shut your windows, you're going to try to figure out where it's coming from and try to make it stop. In our body, insulin is that alarming, right? It's a signal that says, hey, there is too much sugar in the blood. Muscle cells, liver cells, brain cells, whoever you are, take up this sugar, get it out of the blood. There's too much in here. So yes, that's alarming, right? Yeah. So all of our muscles, our cells, everyone listens. Now blood sugar is normal. Now imagine you're back to that person who's eating fruit for breakfast, drinking a lot of coffee, eating a lot of carbs. You're on this blood sugar roller coaster. So what that means is you're hearing that car alarm all day long. So it's not alarming anymore. You've become accustomed to it. It's slightly annoying, but it's not causing you to get up and take action. And so when your body sees the insulin, it's like, I don't really need to do anything. So your cells stop listening. And that's what insulin resistance is. And where that usually leads is your body having to overproduce insulin. And this form of insulin resistance is subclinical, right? Your doctor is not going to see this on labs. You are not diabetic. You're not even pre-diabetic. You're just insulin resistant on a sugar roller coaster, heading down the road of gaining some weight, impacting your cortisol, impacting your adrenals, impacting all of your hormones. And really where we see this end up is, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sometimes PCOS can be a result of this, and obesity and diabetes are really the end game. But this can happen as this resistant state much before you're ever diagnosed with anything.
Oh my gosh, I feel like next to these juicing stores, you should have like a little sign out, Lindsay can help or something. I mean, what we really want to do is wake up and get off that roller coaster. But until we have a physical condition or some crisis that the doctor can measure, we sometimes just go on ignoring that car alarm, right?
Absolutely. It happens with so many aspects of health. We think that the symptoms we're experiencing are normal because everyone gets tired at 2 p.m. Everyone gets hangry before they're going to eat, right? Hangry is a funny term now. It's so normalized because everyone deals with it. But this is a symptom of dysfunction, right? And so until we start to recognize, and I think you said earlier is that the first step to change is admitting there's a problem, right? We need to start viewing these symptoms as a sign of dysfunction, and then we can start making a change.
Let's talk about what are some ways of attack to avoid this insulin resistance and this blood sugar roller coaster.
So the easiest one is eat more fat, right? So when we pair sugar with fat, we slow the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream, right? Thus letting the body see the sugar in a more reasonable way so we don't overproduce insulin. You eat the banana with some, soaked almonds. Great. Now the sugar is basically time released into the bloodstream and not as much insulin needs to be produced. Dietary changes, I think that, most people who are following your podcast kind of understand where we're coming from a dietary piece. But what a lot of people don't understand is how important exercise is to the insulin and sugar discussion.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you're bringing that up because with the Wise Traditions diet and the Weston Price principles, we're focused a lot on the food we take in, but movement is critical too from what you're telling me.
Absolutely. Most people don't know even that when they're diabetic and they're having blood sugar regulation issues, if they were to test themselves and have high blood sugar, higher than normal, instead of using insulin at that moment, you could exercise. And what that does is it tells all of the skeletal muscle cells, right? They need food. Their food is the sugar in the blood. And so they're going to start to take up that sugar in a way that's it's not related to insulin. So we're bypassing the problem that diabetics have with insulin by exercising, and we're still getting sugar out of the blood.
For the full episode with Lindsay, go to episode number 88 on the westonaprice.org website or wherever you get your podcasts. Next up, we're about to hear highlights from episode number 70, The Antidote to Alzheimer's, with Amy Berger. Amy is a certified nutrition specialist and nutritional therapy practitioner. She is also the author of The Alzheimer's Antidote. In this conversation, she talks to us about what she learned as she did research for that very book. She learned about dietary changes that help Alzheimer's patients and those who want to avoid Alzheimer's in the first place. Even if you don't struggle with this condition, you may find relief from brain fog or simply find improved health by taking on what she suggests. So check it out. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Amy.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here.
I saw a video that went viral, I think, on Facebook about a woman, a physician named Mary Newport, whose husband had Alzheimer's. And she demonstrated on that video how he had improvement simply by her adding coconut oil to his diet. Do you know anything about that story?
I do. I've actually met Dr. Newport at some conferences. The story of her husband is really, really remarkable. Unfortunately, Mr. Newport has passed away, but during his last couple of years, he was doing much better, at least with his symptoms and his memory and his personality, because Dr. Newport dug into the research and found some benefit to ketones, and we'll get into that later, but ketones come from certain types of fats, and they come from different metabolic processes in the body, but coconut oil is a very good source that readily gets converted into ketones in the body. And so she changed nothing else about his routine. She didn't change his diet. She didn't change anything about his lifestyle, just added the coconut oil just to see what would happen. And that alone, she noticed a remarkable improvement in him.
What were some of the changes?
Well, I think part of the video shows the clock, his ability to draw the clock, which is kind of like this informal test for Alzheimer's, is how well you can draw a clock. And with the coconut oil, there were, slight changes in his memory, in his cognition, in his ability to just respond to her. Over time, as she got more knowledgeable about how this all works, she was actually adding what we call exogenous ketones. And when his ketone level was much higher, he was significantly better. He was able to dress himself. He was able to participate in conversations. He self-reported. He said he felt better. He felt better able to do things. He could shave. Bathe himself. These were things that he had not been able to do for a very long time. The ketones did not reverse the disease process. He did still unfortunately lose his life, but at least in the short term, his quality of life and also her quality of life were much improved.
I think I saw a movie about a woman who got struck by Alzheimer's. What was the name of that movie? With Julianne Moore.
Oh, Still Alice or something like that. I'm not sure of the name.
Yeah. Still Alice. But so I saw this movie and it showed the degenerative nature of Alzheimer's, and it's just scary, isn't it?
It's very scary because there seems to be so much mystery about it, and it just seems to strike indiscriminately. We don't know who's going to get it, and at least for now, and in the mainstream, medical community, we are led to believe that there's nothing we can do about it. That it's just bad luck, essentially.
Mm-hmm. But what's your theory, Amy? What do you say about that?
Well, it's not really my theory. In the book that I wrote called The Alzheimer's Antidote, what I have tried to do is synthesize the medical literature. So this is the findings of PhDs and MDs and researchers that, eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. I've tried to translate that stuff into plain English so that the loved ones and caregivers of people with this condition can actually put pertinent information into action. And so what I've found is the medical literature is full of papers and journal articles calling Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. And where that comes from is that neurons in regions of the brain that get affected in this illness lose the ability to get energy from glucose. So essentially, they starve to death. This condition is essentially a fuel crisis. It's an energy crisis inside the brain. That's the major thing going wrong. It is more complex than that. I'm simplifying, but there's also, the medical literature is very clear that there are numerous lifestyle and dietary habits that put us at risk for this illness. I don't think it strikes indiscriminately. There is a genetic risk factor for it, but not everyone with that genetic type gets this illness, and most people who actually get Alzheimer's do not have this genetic type. So the genetic type increases your susceptibility, but it doesn't guarantee that you'll get this illness.
So you're saying it's a kind of diabetes of the brain. That's a really fascinating way to look at it. I've never heard it referred to in those terms, but the literature you've read, it's all pointing to the fact that there is a fuel crisis. I love the way you describe that. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. In scientific circles, they call this brain hypometabolism. Hypometabolism meaning too little fuel, too little metabolism is going on. It's not known for sure how this happens or why it happens. We could speculate, but the bottom line is that these neurons become unable to get energy from glucose. And glucose comes mostly from carbohydrate. We can get it through many other sources, but the primary source of glucose in the body is going to come from carbohydrates that we eat. Mm-hmm. And when the brain becomes unable to use glucose or to use it efficiently, that's a major problem because there's not another major fuel source that the brain can turn to in lieu of glucose, except when you have abundant ketones in your blood. Ketones are an alternative fuel for the brain. And not only are they an alternative fuel, we can think of them as almost like a clean burning fuel. Like if the brain were a hybrid car, this is electric as opposed to gasoline, where you're not polluting as much and you're not generating as much CO2 and all these toxic byproducts.
So ketones, can you tell us what those are exactly?
Sure. Ketones are a byproduct of metabolizing fat. When your body's breaking down fat at a relatively high rate and certain other substances are limited, specifically carbohydrate, some of the fat is metabolized into ketones. They're just another energy source, but they're not produced in high levels in the body unless insulin levels are very low. And in most people, because we eat a fairly high carbohydrate diet, our insulin levels are elevated all throughout the day. So it's only when you take deliberate measures to keep your insulin levels low, mostly by keeping carbohydrate intake very low, that your body will ramp up ketone production. And you can produce ketones other ways, like we said earlier, coconut oil. There's also MCT oil. These are special fats that are more readily converted into ketones so that even if somebody's eating a high carbohydrate diet, you can still get their ketone levels up if they consume a lot of coconut and MCT oil.
So all the literature you read indicates that these ketones will help almost give another source of fuel to the brain, correct?
Absolutely. So it's really fascinating. In the Alzheimer's brain, even though the capacity to use glucose efficiently is impaired, the ability to use ketones is not impaired. Now, an aging brain, an Alzheimer's brain, might have a lower capacity to use ketones than a healthy young person, but they can still use them. And we know they can still use them because many, many clinical trials have shown that when you get people's ketone levels up, their cognition is noticeably improved. It doesn't work in everybody, but most people will have some degree of improvement.
What about medication? I've heard of many people who are Alzheimer's patients or who have issues with dementia who are put on medications like Namenda to slow the progress of their loss of cognitive ability. Do the ketones work in the same way?
Really good question. Most of the medication for Alzheimer's is ineffective. It has a very, very tiny improvement effect at best, if that. Most of the drugs have actually been complete failures. So the ketones work in the short term. When your body's ketone level is elevated, the brain now has access to this fuel. But once that's gone, it's gone. So the ketone bodies themselves don't really do anything to actually retard or address the disease process. Whereas I think if you are on the type of diet that generates ketones 24/7, even a low level, because the type of diet that would do that, I think, would go at least some way toward undoing some of the metabolic damage that is causing this in the first place. Now, I'm speculating. I mean, the research is in its infancy, but based on the biochemical mechanisms at work, I do think that, a very low-carb, higher-fat diet to feed these starving neurons, it's anti-inflammatory. There's less oxidative stress. Ketones are a much more efficient fuel. If the primary problem is, we kind of skipped over this, but there's a huge role of insulin here, and we've got to get insulin lower. And the way to do that is a low-carb diet. So the ketones themselves are very powerful. If somebody can get their hands on an exogenous ketone product, which is almost like a ketone supplement, that will improve cognition and behavior in the short term. But I think the way to actually make inroads toward reversing the damage instead of just managing the symptoms is to do more of a ketogenic diet and other lifestyle interventions too, but the diet would be the place to start.
For the whole episode with Amy, go to westinaprice.org and find episode number 70, The Antidote to Alzheimer's. As we prepare to queue up highlights from our next episode, I want to say thank you for your support. You listeners are the reason we do what we do. Check out what Mo H86 had to say on Apple Podcasts. I love this podcast. It breaks down tough topics into bite-sized chunks that are easy to understand. I'm constantly learning something new and rushing off to do some deep diving into the new subject. It has helped me drastically with my family and most importantly with my patients. Thanks. Such a lifesaver. Thanks, Mo. We certainly hope so. You guys, if this show has meant as much to you as it has to Mo, Please share your favorite episodes with friends and family. It'll be a gift to them and a gift to us as you help to spread the word far and wide. And finally, we've got highlights from episode 84 with microbiologist Kiran Krishnan. Kiran has been working in the field of molecular medicine and microbiology for a long time. He has a great handle on all things related to gut health. The gut has been called our second brain. Listen carefully as Kiran describes in detail how our gut works, and specifically what we can do to shore it up, protect it from toxins, and enhance our well-being.
So what most people don't really realize is that we've got a very, very important barrier of defense against the outside world. And the fact of the matter is, the outside world that we live in today is an extremely toxic place, right? And not just the chemicals that surround us, but the foods that we consume and the air that we breathe. All of these things are unusual to the human body. If you imagine, we've evolved over the last 3 million years or so. What we're exposed to right now is something that we've only been exposed to in the last, say, 50 years in general. So we haven't really evolved to figure out how to deal with all of this toxicity. So we have this barrier that separates us, and when I say us, I mean the inside of us, the blood system, from all of this toxicity, and that's the mucosal layer.
Oh, mucosa, that sounds like the word mucus.
Exactly, and you hit the nail on the head. It is actually a really dense, thick, wonderful layer of mucus. And most of us think of mucus as a bad thing, right? It's snot, it's gross and all that, but it's actually the biggest protective barrier in our body. So we think of our outside skin as the barrier to the outside world, but it's not. The mucous layer in the body is 150 times bigger in terms of surface area than the skin, than the outside skin. Right, so every one of your orifices, your mouth, your nose, your vaginal canals, everything is the first point of entry when something comes into your body has to go through the mucosal layer.
Wow.
Now, the mucosal layer is a very dynamic area. The top part of the mucosal layer is where most of the bacteria inside your body reside. And keep in mind that we have more bacteria inside our body than we have human cells that make up our entire body. In fact, 10 times more bacteria than we have human cells. So we've got over 100 trillion bacteria cells inside our body, and we've got about 10 trillion cells that make up the entire human body.
I love that, because what you're saying is we are like a walking rainforest, right? We have all these different elements to our body that are happening beyond just the cells. It's all this microbiome you're describing.
Yeah, and that's the important thing that people really have to understand, is that you have to think of yourself as a walking, talking rainforest. What we are, we're not a collection of organs like a heart, brain, lungs, all connected by vascular tissue and neurons and all that. We are, like you said, a walking, talking rainforest. We are an ecology. And the only way that this ecology remains stable and healthy is that we have proper balance, right? Just like your garden, right? If you had a beautiful garden in your backyard, imagine you have a very complex garden with 1,000 different plants in it. You know, any overgrowth of weeds in one portion of the garden, or you have a chemical spill in another side of the garden, is going to destroy that ecology. And once one part of the ecology is destroyed, that's a trickling down effect on the rest of the garden as well, right? So we have to make sure we're maintaining that balance. And this mucosal layer, you have to think of it as like the soil in the garden. It's where most of the microbes live. And then also it has key immune tissue function and immune communication in the mucosal layer as well. Now, below the mucosal layer, so imagine this thick wall of mucus, and you go below that, you go through the mucosal layer. The next layer you find, at least in the gut, is called the intestinal epithelial layer. In the brain, it's called the blood-brain barrier. In the lungs, it's the lung epithelium. So it's like this lining of tissue. That's the last barrier between the outside of the body and the inside blood. Once you get past that tissue, everything is inside the body now.
So you've got your skin, then you've got the mucosa layer, and then you have this other layer you're discussing now, right?
Yep, the other layer. Let's call it the inner cellular lining, right? In the gut, we call it the intestinal epithelial lining. It's a fancy word, but it's basically a lining of cells that is the last barrier between stuff outside of the body and inside of the body.
Okay.
And that thin little barrier, and believe it or not, it's only one cell thick. being one of the most important barriers in the body, it's only one cell thick, so it's not a very big layer. And that's why that mucus layer on top of it is extremely important, because that acts as like the biggest protection for this one cell thick lining that really defends us.
Kiran, I'm imagining like a castle, right? So our body is like this castle. And so we've got, track with me for a second, we've got the moat, that's the skin, let's say. And then you've got the stone, that's the mucosal layer. And then you have one more line of defense. But I don't know my castles well enough to know what I would describe that as.
Let's call those the soldiers.
Okay, we got the soldiers.
Right? Yeah, they're all standing shoulder to shoulder, acting as the last line of defense as a barrier to things invading through. Right. So that's a great analogy. And the stone layer is actually the hardiest layer, right? If you think about it, even in a castle, once you get past the stone walls, then it's not that hard to break through the soldiers that are standing shoulder to shoulder. And that's how the body really functions. So once you break through this mucosal layer, then you end up finding a much easier time getting into the body and causing a whole bunch of inflammation. So what starts to happen is, imagine the mucus layer is a thick layer, and the top part of the mucus layer is covered with all the microbes, the good microbes in your gut or in your body, and all the bad microbes as well. That's where most of them are. Now, what the bad microbes are always trying to do is penetrate through that mucus layer and get deeper inside, closer to that soldier layer, right? That's what they're trying to do. And in fact, they will spit out enzymes to break down the mucus and make it more liquid-like, rather than being a thick, viscous mucus layer, which is more protective. And so when you have an overgrowth of things like salmonella and clostridia and prevotella in the body, because of dysbiosis, because of our lifestyles and antibiotic use and chemicals in our foods and things like that, you start causing more and more disruption and perturbation in that mucus layer. So your body has a defense. And once it starts sensing that the mucus layer starts breaking down, it starts recruiting immune cells to that area to try to protect. So imagine that you've got your special forces soldiers that are standing behind the line of soldiers that are standing shoulder to shoulder. They are your elite players. Okay. And so once the mucus layer, the stone walls start coming apart, then your body calls in these special forces that come through that soldier layer and into the mucus layer to try to help the situation, because it thinks there's an invasion coming in.
We're all listening to you on the edge of our seat thinking, how can we do this? How can we shore up that mucosa layer? How can we avoid the LPS, breaking free? So it sounds like you're giving us some ideas. Can you put it into plain English? How can we really apply some of these ideas to make our bodies as strong as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And none of this matters unless you have practical solutions, right? How do we change our behavior? For one, we want to start reducing the perturbations in the microbiome. And the things that really mess up the microbiome are environment, right? So we need to clean up our environment. Things like the presence of glyphosate, which I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot, the weed killers, chlorine or Clorox-based cleaners in your homes, all of these preservatives and chemicals in personal care products, what's in your deodorant, what's in your shampoo, what's in your lotion. Imagine that your body is an ecology. It's a garden. And if your body is a garden and you have these wonderful plants, would you take the lotion that you're using on your body and go squirt it on your plants? Would you take the shampoo that you're using and go squirt it in your garden? You probably know that if you put that shampoo in your soil, it's going to kill off the plants, right? Yeah. And if it's going to kill the plants, it's going to harm your body. So think of yourself as an ecology and be very careful what you put in and on yourself. And then from a dietary standpoint, we need to go to clean, whole foods that are not processed. Try to get as organic as you can possibly be to remove all of the chemical additives to foods, because that perturbs the microbiome. Then there's some very specific things you can do to regenerate the mucus layer and that epithelial layer. For one, the spore-based probiotics we talked about before does that. We actually did a study where we showed that in 30 days, we can almost eliminate this metabolic endotoxic response just by using the probiotic alone. Wow. Where, 30 days prior to that, we gave healthy individuals a challenge meal, and we saw a 600% increase in this LPS toxin in the serum after the meal, a 600% increase. It takes the body almost 2 weeks to recover from that one meal. Right? That's how toxic it is. Then we give them the probiotic for 30 days, and then at the end of 30 days, they're having no increase in toxicity after eating food at all, just completely eliminated. So the probiotic will go a long way to doing that. And then there's a few things you can take as supplements that really do help enhance the mucus layer. For example, there are 4 amino acids, one called L-threonine, L-serine, L-proline, and L-cysteine. These are really important amino acids that are used for the production of mucus and shoring up that mucus layer that's really important. Other things that tend to help as well, like colostrum, can help that those dead and dying soldiers. Mm-hmm. And then, some other pro-immune activation that improves the production of those antibodies that basically sop up the LPS, things like omega fatty acids, glycine, glutamine, vitamin C, and zinc go a really long way in helping your immune system sop up that LPS, so it's not always increasing in your body every time you eat a meal. And so what happens, what you find is that the 2 steps forward, 1 step back occurs because you're doing these therapeutic things and you're changing your lifestyle, you're changing your diet, and you're starting to see symptom improvements, and then you eat a meal and LPS goes up 300% in your system. That's your 1 step back. And your body now has to recover from that meal. As we showed in the studies, it takes up to 2 weeks to recover from a single meal. And when you have this breakdown of your system, even a healthy meal can cause this endotoxic rise because your body's just not designed anymore to protect you against the process of eating. So we need to fix that layer. Think about the mucus layer, the microbiome, and then that soldier cell layer, the epithelial layer. Once we fix that, all other therapies for conditions that you're dealing with become that much more effective, and you'll see huge changes. Wellness.
I know a doctor who says we should be able to eat McDonald's without any repercussions if we're strong enough, right?
Yep. And that's what we studied in our test. So the challenge meal that we gave the subjects in our study was a McDonald's breakfast. What we saw in the baseline test was that when we gave them a McDonald's breakfast, 18 different cytokines, these are immune markers that measure inflammation, went up through the roof right after the meal, and their LPS, that toxin in the serum, so it migrated from the intestines into the blood, went up 600%. After taking the probiotic for 30 days, they came back, we did the same exact test. That McDonald's meal registered like eating the healthiest avocado in the world. It did not have that negative effect. We're not saying you should take the stuff and go eat McDonald's every day. That's, of course, going to have a bunch of other effects. But what that's showing is that we can convert the microbiome and that mucus layer to a protective version rather than a non-protective version, because we are omnivores. As a species, we evolved to be omnivores. A lion is an obligate carnivore. Lion cannot eat plants. If it eats plants, it'll get sick. Herbivores are vegetarians. They cannot eat meat. If they eat meat, they'll get sick. Humans evolved as omnivores. We eat everything, and that's how we're supposed to be. So yes, we shouldn't have to be so sensitive where a little bit of gluten throws off our whole body, or that one fast food on the road trip screws up our whole body for the next week or so. We should be able to handle that. But the reason we're not handling it is the breakdown of the flora, the breakdown of the mucus system, and then the breakdown of the soldier cells. Great news is we can fix it.
For the whole episode with Kiran, look for episode 84 on the westonaprice.org website or wherever you get your podcasts. So that wraps it up, guys. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season and year's end. Oh, and by the way, the Wise Traditions podcast is this close to 1 million downloads. We want to celebrate that milestone in style, so stay tuned and stay healthy. Also, I want to give a big thank you to Podcast Village. Charlie Burney and his team are great at what they do. They are pros when it comes to training, producing, and promoting podcasts. Check them out at podcastvillage.com. Special thanks to editor Joe Ennis and the team of interns who help with the show: Cynthia Castro Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Alexma Alvarado, Elisa Canty, and Lily Hanft. Thanks also to Amy Marvin for help transcribing episodes. Hey, and don't forget to stay connected with me at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at Holistic_Hilda Hoda on Instagram. Tell me what you got out of this episode in particular, or the Wise Traditions podcast as a whole. Your feedback is a gift to me, so thank you.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.